Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Aphren with the Four Pillars Proto Temple. So before COVID hit and most of us were either out of work or in quarantine, I had sent a questionnaire out to my temple members asking them what it was that they wanted to learn about, sort of trying to create a new cycle of workshops for them. And so most of them, after the survey, decided that what they wanted to learn about was Ritualcraft. So I decided that because we can't always get together because of COVID, that I would go ahead and create a Ritualcraft series on YouTube. So what I'm going to do is this is going to be a several-part series on Ritualcraft to give everyone information about ritual lore, about history of certain rituals, and explanations of the ritual pieces that we perform and sort of why we do. And of course, because I am a member of the Karelian nativist tradition, you will find that some of the information I am providing is specific to the Karelian tradition. So that information can also be found on many different venues, as well as through witchschool.com, which is the Karelian educational ministry, which of course is the primary location for learning about Karelianism and many other topics, but Karelianism as well. So you'll find some of the information I am presenting to be also part of that. So let's go ahead and get started. So I have my Book of Shadows here. We're going to go ahead and get started. So what exactly is ritual? For those of you who know me, who have been following me, you realize that I absolutely love ritual. I love the whole pageantry of it. I love the robes and the costumes that sometimes take place in things like ritual drama. I also love the articles, the ritual articles and tools, and just everything that comes along with ritual, and which I absolutely love. We as humans are ritualistic creatures. We get up every morning, we brush our teeth, we put on our clothes the same way, we drive to work the same way, we come into work the same way, and so we're habitual, we're ritualistic creatures. And so a lot of times we like to use rituals as a way to punctuate our day or to punctuate our life. And so rituals are very, very important. If we look, for instance, at Catholicism and we see how the sacraments have really captured different stages in human life, we can see how important it is to punctuate a lot of these experiences. From birth, you have baptism, and then you have communion, and you have confession, and you have confirmation, and you have birth, and you have death, and you have all these elements of, you know, these moments in our lives and these transitional periods. Society does not provide us information on how to deal with these transitional periods. We all know that these are coming, right? Like, we all know that puberty is coming, or, you know, especially those of us who have been through puberty. We know that marriage is coming, and we know that birth is coming, and we know that death is coming. So we know that these things are coming in our lives, but sometimes they don't. In our modern society, we don't always have the tools necessary to traverse these experiences. And so ritual is really a great way that we as humans can not only punctuate, commemorate, but also in some ways inform one another about what is happening and what to experience and how we will experience these transitional periods. So religion as well as ritual is so important, and I talk about this in other videos, so it's probably going to be repeated for some of you. Joseph Campbell talks about three specific things. He talks about myth, he talks about ritual, and he talks about symbols. So ritual is one part of that triad. Essentially, myths are the stories that we tell one another, that we learn about, that we tell ourselves, which inform our understanding of the divine and our relationship with the divine. So we have a story, right? Something happens in the story that helps us to understand what it means to exist and what our place is in the universe. The symbols are pieces of that story which inform our understanding and sort of dig into our psyche in such a way that when we experience or we hear or we see these symbols, we are automatically transported, transformed, and connected with that story again. I can't really think of an example offhand. Okay, so here's an example. In the story of Inanna, when Inanna goes to the underworld and she has the descent of the goddess, this theme motif is really popular in paganism. So this descent of the goddess, right? So the goddess goes to the underworld looking for her beloved Damuzi. So Inanna goes to the underworld. When she gets to the underworld, she has to pass through 7 gates. The number 7 is symbolic, right? As she passes through the gates, she takes off pieces of herself, which represent her status and her state as a high-ranking member in the pantheon of the gods. So as she's doing that, she's kind of lowering herself down to being not really immortal, but being sort of a lower level being, peasant, if you will. And so each of these items that she's removing from herself are symbols that represent different associations that she has, different aspects of herself. She takes off the crown, which of course means royalty. She takes off the garment, which means something else. She takes off the earrings, which means something else, so on and so forth. So as we come up to maybe an experience where we are presented with the garment of Inanna, or the earrings of Inanna, or the crown of Inanna, those symbols automatically take us to that experience that then put us in the mindset, or put us in sort of a spiritual or mythical mindset, frame of mind, that helps us to connect with the whole story in its entirety. I hope that makes sense. So you have the myth and you have the symbols that help us to understand and remember the myth. The symbols a lot of times have multiple meanings, layered meanings, and so we see the symbols help to continue to inform us. And as we are revisiting the story, we are maybe getting different layers of the myth and the meanings of the symbols. Then finally we come to ritual, which is what this series is about, Wiccan ritual and Ritualcraft. So as we practice our ritual, we are physically reenacting the story through the use of the symbols. Does that make sense to you? So as we are performing our rituals, we are being reminded of our place in the cosmos. We're being reminded of maybe how the world was created. We're being reminded of our relationship with the gods. We're being reminded of the relationship of reciprocity between ourselves and the gods, and as we give a gift, they give a gift in return. And so all of these things are sort of informed in the ritual. And so by practicing the ritual, we are directly enacting the myth, and we're directly acting and reacting in the myth. That's the power of ritual. So you see this time and time and time again. So what we're going to be talking about is Wiccan ritual, and we're going to be talking about what about ritual informs our understanding of the cosmos, where these experiences come from, where the ritual comes from, and how it sort of all comes together. So come along with me on this journey. We're going to learn a great deal of things. We will also be going over ritual tools again. I've done 1 or 2 videos in the past on ritual tools, but we're going to be doing it again. It doesn't hurt to revisit that, and in the context of Ritualcraft, and really get an understanding. So we'll be talking about that. So I invite you to come along with me and experience the wonderful world that is Wiccan Ritualcraft. So where does Wiccan ritual come from? Most of us would say, if we were asked that question, we would say that Wiccan ritual comes from Gerald Gardner, and we would be correct in that. Most of what we have today as modern Wiccan ritual comes from Gerald Gardner, from the original Book of Shadows, which Gerald Gardner claimed came from the New Forest Coven, which he then copied and copied and copied. If you've studied anything by Janet and Stuart Farrar, you'll see how the text had developed over time. So we know that it It wasn't a complete text that Gerald Gardner and his coven at the time worked to develop it more and more, and develop the rituals more, and develop the initiations more, and just a lot of things continue to develop through his time, in the time of, you know, early British witchcraft at that time. So a lot of it comes from that, but you have to understand that Gerald Gardner was inspired by a lot of other things. So if you know anything about early Wiccan history, you'll know that Gerald Gardner was a member of the OTO, the Ordo Templorensis, which is a German mystical lodge similar to the Order of the Golden Dawn. And there was, at one time, there were rumors that he was actually going to be given a charter to open his own lodge of the OTO, which he later decided, no, I don't want to. I'm going to hang out with the witches instead, and I'm going to learn from them, and I'm going to have my own coven instead. So I'm going to go that route instead of this route. So that was kind of where he was going, but he was inspired by a lot of mystical lodges, and the late 1800s and early 1900s was a wonderful time for mystical and magical lodges and a resurgence of mystical and magical practice. So you have like, you know, the Freemasons and the OTO and the Order of the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucians, and just all these people doing all kinds of things. And Gerald Gardner was at one time or another involved in all of it. So you'll see in a lot of Wiccan ritual that there are pieces that sort of come from maybe the Freemasons, this idea of, you know, saying "so mote it be" at the end. That is a Masonic phrase that the Freemasons used. You'll see that casting the circle was something that is very much from ceremonial magic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you'll see all these pieces that sort of came together into Gerald Gardner's version of magic. But I have to sort of preface by stating that Wiccan ritual is religious, right? So it does apply to a particular faith, which is Wicca. Now, obviously, there are people who are witches that are not Wiccan. We know this. And there are people that practice magic that maybe don't follow the same ritual format that Wiccans do, and there maybe are some people who practice magic that follow some of the similar format that Wiccans do, but don't identify as Wiccan. So there's a little bit of confusion there, you know, from the outside looking in. But suffice to say that the information I'm providing to you is to the best of my knowledge, based upon the Wiccan system. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about ritual theory before we get started. So, in the Wiccan understanding of ritual, at least in the Corellian understanding of ritual, ritual is not a spectator sport. That means that you're not sitting back watching things happen. You're not watching the priest or the priestess perform a service. You are involved. Now, when I first started in Wicca, there was this sort of pervasive idea that everyone who was Wiccan was required to learn all of the rites, all of the rituals, and was basically required to be a priest. There wasn't this level of laity that there is today. There are a lot of people that practice as lay members. They want to come to the festivals. They want to come to the rituals whenever something's available. They maybe want to partake in, you know, psychic development classes or something here and there, but they're not to the level where they've dedicated their life or their practice to this experience, and that's fine. And what we're finding as we're moving on through our practice and through the development of Wicca is that we're finding that it just doesn't need to be the case that we have everyone be a priest or priestess. And not everyone has that time or energy or experience or knowledge or ability to be able to do that. And that's fine. So there's sort of been a shift in the past decade or so, where now you're getting this shift of initiated clergy and of uninitiated practitioners, laity. So we will find that there are people in our circles that don't know very much about ritual, or don't care to learn the inner workings of ritual, or maybe like to learn because it's interesting to them, but they're not really going to do much with it. They're going to be sort of armchair ritualists. So there's this whole sort of nuance with that. So please just be mindful of all of that as we continue with these lectures and this series. So you have this idea of ritual not being a spectator sport. So like I said, when I first started, I had to know how to do these things. I was a solitary, I had no choice. So I learned the rituals, I learned them in and out, I learned the nuances of the rituals, and we're going to talk about some of those. I didn't have someone to perform the ritual for me, and I could just sit back and say, thanks, have a good day. That wasn't like that. So now it's a little bit different. So now we have, more of a laity. So even still, however, ritual is still not a spectator sport, which means that we, for at least in the Correllian tradition, if you show up to a Correllian ritual, expect to be given a part. In the Correllian tradition, we are a 3-degree system. Some traditions are a 2-degree system now. We are still a 3-degree system, which essentially means that we have a 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, and we also have an outer court. So that helps to inform the ritual leader and helps to say, okay, you're 1st degree, you are familiar enough to be able to perform certain acts in ritual, but you're not maybe able to be ritual leader. So if I asked a 1st degree, hey, would you mind casting the circle, they would be able to do that. If I asked a 2nd degree, would you mind invoking the goddess, they would be able to do that. If I asked a 3rd degree, hey, would you mind accepting the oracle, they would be able to do that. If someone was in outer court, I may just simply say, hey, would you mind making sure that the chalice is filled and keeping incense on the coals? That's cool too. So sometimes, depending on the rank and the degree of the person, helps everyone to be understanding about what their qualifications and their comfortability is. Although some people may be 2nd degrees and be like, I'm not comfortable doing that, find somebody else. But either way, it still helps us to kind of understand where we're at, and what we need to do to make sure that every part of the ritual is taken care of. So I've been to rituals by other magical and religious traditions, and they work absolutely beautifully when there's a small series of people that participate or that sort of officiate or facilitate the ritual, and other people simply just watch. But I think that you'll find a lot of times, especially in a Correllian ritual, is that everyone will be given some kind of a part. So no matter how big or how small, you will be involved in some way. And because it's not a spectator sport, when you are involved in a ritual, there is this understanding that even though the high priest or the high priestess or the highest ranking clergy person that's there will be officiating or facilitating the ritual, even though you might not be doing that part, or maybe you don't have any part, the understanding is that you are following along, you're lending your energies with the person who's actually doing that part of the ritual, and you're just generally being supportive. So it's not like, oh, well, it's not my part, I'm going to flip through the script and figure out what is going on next, or I'm going to play on my phone until it's my part. It's not a theatrical production, okay? And as much as I love theater, I have a bachelor's degree in theater, it's not a production. It's not a matter of waiting for your time to come up and then jumping up there in the spotlight, doing your song and dance, and then sitting back down. It's a matter of supporting everyone, and then when you get up to do your part, they support you. And the whole idea, if we go back to the concept of the cone of power, which we'll probably be talking about in later videos, this idea of the cone of power. So the magic and the power needs to continue to grow, to continue to build. And as it's continuing to grow and build, we need everybody involved. Because if everybody's not going to be involved, then you're hindering the process. Imagine you're trying to build a stream and somebody keeps putting boulders in the way. The water's not going to go anywhere. It's going to create a dam. That's what happens with the magic and the energy and just the overall vibe. If you have some people that really don't want to participate, or that really aren't participating and are distracting or are distracted because they're playing on their phone or something, that really kind of puts a damper on everybody else in the group. So just be mindful that even if it's a Correllian ritual or just a general Wiccan ritual, understanding that when you're there, you need to be paying attention, you need to be engaged, you need to be lending your energies. I've been in some really beautiful rituals where everybody is on the same page. We call it group mind. Everyone is on the same page, everyone is lending their energies, everyone is participating, even though they're not the ones standing up there saying the invocation, they're still invoking from their heart and still lending that energy and that support, and it is absolutely beautiful. It is moving. You can feel the magic, you can feel the energy, and when the ritual is over, you know that you've done a good job because you're exhausted by the time you're done. I've done some rituals where I'm like, where am I even? Because I'm not present, and I can admit that. There are other rituals I've done, I've gotten finished, I'm like, oh my gosh, do I need to eat something? I am exhausted from the energy, the toll of the energy from that ritual. And you'll know when you've tapped into sort of universal energy, when you've tapped in and you've made that spiritual connection with the divine, because you will feel different, and you'll know what I mean when it happens. So that little sort of tidbit of information I was providing for you was simply to say that it's important that as we continue to practice, that we stay present, that we stay involved, and that even though we are not the one doing that particular part of the ritual, that we still lend our support and our energy and our focus to whomever is doing that portion of the ritual, because that is what's going to continue to build and build and build and build until finally you've created that cone of power, sending it off to your goal. So that's a little bit about ritual theory and sort of different things about that, and understanding that ritual can be a very powerful and dynamic and transformative experience. As long as you're willing to put yourself into that position, you're willing to get into that mindset, and you're willing to sort of go there. I want to talk real quick about initiation, because initiation rituals are incredibly powerful. They give you the opportunity to sort of step through the door and go there. I know a lot of people that have incredibly moving initiation rituals, because you've created an environment outside of space, outside of time, where you're in this sort of liminal state. And as you're in this liminal state and you're sort of have one foot on both sides of life, and you're standing between the worlds, that you have the opportunity to come in contact with the divine. And through that contact with the divine and being able to be conferred the blessing by a high priest or a high priestess, giving you the opportunity to have that experience, is incredibly transformative and incredibly powerful. And it's incredibly meaningful. So initiation is an incredibly meaningful experience, and it needs to be treated incredibly well and with much respect. In the Correllian tradition, we do not televise, nor do we tell what the content of the initiation ritual is, because we understand the importance of it, and we want you to be able to experience it afresh as though you've never experienced it before. And many other traditions are very secretive with their initiation rituals as well. Although if you do enough research, you can find some initiation rituals by Gardnerian Alexandrian traditions, but understand that every traditional is a little bit different with their initiations, and initiations need to be held to that high standard, that high level of secrecy and that high level of respect, because that is part of the mystery that makes them work. And sometimes without that piece, it's going to be a flop, and it's not going to be what you're expecting it to be. So please keep that in mind as you practice, and as we also talk about Ritualcraft. So we mentioned earlier about ritual, how ritual involves myths, how ritual involves symbols, and how those interplay and how they sort of affect our psyche and sort of get us to this place of outside of time. Now, depending on your tradition, depending on even your group, and how much importance your group places upon the sort of, I refer to it as the mythic cycle, because there are several different mythic cycles or stories that sort of inform our overall understanding of the wheel of the year. So depending on your tradition and your group and how in which mythic cycle they participate in will inform some of your ritual. And so understand that when you perform ritual, you're placing yourself into what some people refer to as mythic time. So this sort of mythic time is a sort of a time outside of time where you're sort of you take on this sort of different mindset and this sort of level of understanding that places you in a mythic time. And that mythic time is where your worldview sort of blankets everything. So the Wiccan worldview kind of comes in and it sort of covers everything and kind of creates this mythic time, this mythic space that everything that we begin to do is constantly reaffirming that mythic time or that mythic place. So I will give you an example. So for those of you who are familiar with, say, the Norse pantheon, you understand, if you're familiar with Norse mythology, that there are believed that at the beginning of time, when there was the sort of the mythic giant Ymir, right? So there was Ymir, and he was then killed, and his body was used to create the world, right? So when his body was used to create the world, his skull became the firmament of heaven, to use those terms. His skull sort of became the dome of heaven. And it is believed in this mythic time that there are 4 dwarves which hold up the 4 corners of his cranium, basically. Those 4 dwarves, of course, are associated with the 4 directions. And so if you practice in a Norse tradition, or you practice in a Norse inspired Wiccan tradition, for example, then when you call the quarters, or when you're honoring or giving homage to the quarters, you're giving homage to the 4 dwarves, and you're kind of being reminded, and you recollect this whole myth, this whole story about Ymir and the creation of the world and the cranium and all that I just mentioned. So you kind of by doing this, you're kind of reminded of that story. So these symbols of the 4 quarters and maybe the names become symbolic and sort of represent these ideas, which then inform your understanding of the myth. So you're stepping into sort of a mythic time where now you have the 4 directions, which are, 4 dwarves holding up the cranium of Ymir. So just as an example. So let's go ahead and delve in. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about ritual, and then we're going to go from there, and we're going to talk about ritual tools and how they inform and inspire our understanding of that. So in the Krelian tradition, they've kind of created these sections for the ritual, just as a way for people who are experiencing ritual or are participating in ritual can understand maybe what part of the ritual they're in and what part's coming next. It's sort of a logical flow to the ritual, and it makes perfect sense to me. So, of course, the ritual starts out by creating a sacred space. Now, in some traditions, especially traditions of nature and earth-centered faiths, They believe that the universe is sacred already. The world is sacred already. The animals and the plants and the experiences of life and the biomes and all of nature that surrounds us is already sacred. So we don't need to create a special place because it's already created. There are other traditions that believe that you have to sort of create a sacred place or even reclaim a place as being sacred. Not that it's any less sacred if you don't reclaim it, but just this whole process and experience of making the intention to create and claim this space as being a space used for ritual and spiritual purposes because of its inherent spiritual and sacredness, is sort of another idea. So for us in the Wiccan tradition, in the Wiccan spiritual tradition, we take places and we make them sacred for the time that we're in our ritual. So for some of us that don't have the luxury of having an entire ritual room, I used to have one and I absolutely loved it, but I found I didn't use it as often as I should have or could have. So now I just use other areas of my apartment as a ritual space when the time is right. So for those of us that maybe have their own ritual spaces, we might be able to make an argument and say, well, I don't have to create sacred space every time because it's already sacred. I only use it for this one purpose, so it's already a sacred space to me. And I think that's an argument you could certainly make. For most of us, our living room or our bedroom magically turns into a ritual space when it's time for ritual. And we turn and we take ourselves from ordinary, mundane time into mythic time through these rituals. Excuse me. So we have to create our space, right? So of course there are many different ways of doing that. Some traditions will take a representation of each of the 4 elements and take them around the space, and by doing so they are sort of calling in the energies of those elements, wrapping them all together and creating this sort of sacred space. Let's go back for just a moment and talk a little bit about Wiccan belief, because it does, again, based upon what I mentioned earlier about myth, symbol, and ritual, it does inform our ritual. In Wicca, we believe that there are 5 elements that are the building blocks of the universe: air, fire, water, earth, and spirit. So each of these 5 elements is the building block of our world. When we acknowledge and we incorporate these elements into our rituals, not only are we recreating in some way this mythic time, this mythic experience where all of the world has been created from each of these elements coming together, coalescing, and creating the world, we are also invoking all 5 elements individually, coming together, creating a wholeness, creating a balance, creating a place where we are fully entrenched in the aspects and powers and abilities and strength and protection of each of these elements in our space. And it creates this mythic time. So some traditions, like I mentioned, will take a representation of each of the elements, and they will go around the space and they will sort of reclaim, as I mentioned earlier, reclaim the space as being a holy space by incorporating these elements in a very real physical sense. We have air, we have fire, we have water, we have earth, we have the practitioner, which is spirit. We're all here, let's party, right? So the Correllian tradition is a little bit different, and other traditions are as well. Instead of bringing around all 4 elements, we combine 2 of the elements and the other 2 of the elements, and we take those 2 combinations around the space. So essentially we create holy water from salt and water. The holy water is holy in and of itself because it is a combination of two elements. It's also gives you the basic properties. We know that salt is cleansing. We know that if you take salt, you add it to water, or even by itself, it's going to be corrosive, right? It's going to corrode different things. I have an offering cauldron that's made out of probably pewter or tin or something even, and I thought it would be a good idea, instead of using sand, to use salt, because the salt would help dry out the incense, and the incense wouldn't be so difficult to light because of humidity. That was my thought process. Well, what of course happened was the salt was so corrosive that it corroded my cauldron, much to my dismay. So of course I'm back to sand, or better yet, rice, because it also has sort of drying properties, not corrosive. Anyway, doesn't matter. So salt is corrosive, so salt is cleansing. Salt destroys negativity. Salt is cleansing. If you take salt and you wash something with it, it's going to kill the bacteria on it, and it's cleansing. That much we can say. Salt water is also the water of life. Salt water, like the waters of the womb, like the waters of the primordial salty brine that many early pagan faiths talk about as being sort of the void and the first beginning, when life came out of the salty brine of the earth. You know, and that motif is found in many cultures. So we create this salt water, which we then bless the salt, we bless the water, we create this salt water, which then becomes holy water. So we take this holy water and we use it to cleanse the space. And as it cleanses the space, we have the opportunity not only to ground, because salt is grounding, salt is from the earth, salt is grounding, it gives us the opportunity to ground and sort of destroy negativity. So as we send it around, the water is cleansing, like taking a bath. So we cleanse the space with the water, we ground the negativity with the salt. And so we create this holy water that we use to bless and cleanse the area. And we do this for a number of reasons. Some people believe it's because you have negativity just generally in the world or in our daily lives or in our person. So this negativity we need to sort of destroy, because when we create a sacred space, we don't want negativity. We want to be able to bring in love, we want to be able to bring in life and light, and we want to be able to have a nice, positive, high vibrational area that is conducive to the positivity that we perform in our workings. So we want to cleanse. After we cleanse, we turn our attention to sacred incense. Of course, sacred incense is created by taking incense, which is the element of air, and we use fire, which is a lighter or matches or some sort of fire-creating implement, and we light the incense. So we're marrying fire with air, and we're creating sacred incense. So as we do that, we then use this sacred incense to raise the vibration of the area. So now that we've cleansed, we've completely removed all of that caca. Now we're using the sacred incense to raise the vibration. When you smell incense, you're automatically put into a spiritual frame of mind. When you step into a temple or a church that has incense burning, you immediately are brought to this place of spirituality. You know something magical is happening. You know that you are in the presence of divinity. You know that you are in a place where your prayers are going to be carried on the smoke of the incense to your higher power. So you're placed in a spiritual place automatically. So for most of us, and I know for me, because I've been practicing for so many years, when I smell incense, I'm thinking, okay, something's going on here. Is someone performing some kind of magic, or am I walking into a spiritual place? Am I walking into a Buddhist temple where I need to be quiet and I need to be mindful because people are meditating? Maybe I need to take off my shoes. Or am I walking into a pagan temple where offerings are being burned to the gods? So it changes our perspective. It acts as a magical key that changes our perspective and puts us in the right frame of mind for magic and spiritual workings to occur. So we use the sacred water, the holy water, we use the sacred incense, and we take it around the space to purify the space. And we do that in a very specific way for a very specific reason, which we'll talk about in the next segment of this video. So stay tuned for the next segment, and I'll see you then.